Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Nadine.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for coming to today's engagement session. Welcome. We're here to discuss Eurasian watermilfoil management in Christina Lake and the potential use of aquatic herbicide of a ProcellaCor FX, a new herbicide. So first we'll start with the presentation portion of this session, and then we'll move on to question and answers. And we're just going to start with a little introduction, who we are and what our role is in the project. We'll move on to background, what is Eurasian watermilfoil and how does it impact the lake? Some management methods, and then previous removal methods within Christina Lake. And then we'll move on to ProcellaCor FX. What is it? How does it work? And how is it applied? And then lastly, potential effects on people and the ecosystem. So my name's Nadine, and my colleague Eleanor will be jumping in partway through the presentation. And we work with Keefer Ecological Services, and our team is comprised of environmental scientists that specialize in biology, ecology, agrology, and community engagement. So our role is simply to research ProcellaCor FX, gather the information, present it to the community, and then also present it to RDKB, and then gather community opinions, thoughts, and feedbacks. I'd like to highlight here that we are in no way affiliated with CPRO, the makers of ProcellaCor FX, and that we're here as an unbiased third party. So here's an example of Eurasian watermilfoil. On the left here, you can see it's a long, slender plant. Often you'll see it with a reddish tip, and the leaves are whorled around the stems in 3s or 4s. So it's an aquatic invasive plant, and it arrived in Christina Lake about the mid-1980s. And that was likely just from a small fragmentation that was attached to a person or a thing, for example, a boat. It likes to grow in warm, nutrient-rich waters, and it prefers a depth between 3 to 5 meters, but it can grow in waters of a depth of up to 10 meters. So like many invasive species, Eurasian watermilfoil has some sort of competitive advantage over the native plants. So it creates these large monoculture mats that outcompete native plants by blocking sunlight, which reduces biodiversity. It can also create these low oxygen zones through decomposition, and that happens in the fall and the winter when the plants begin to die back. And as the plants die back, little bacteria and microorganisms start to eat the little organic matter, and then they need lots of oxygen, so that uses up oxygen in the water column. So this alters the native habitat for fish and aquatic life, and then it can interfere with recreation, such as swimming, boating, and fishing.
Really quick, Nadine, it looks like someone has their hand up. Tara, do you want to unmute and ask the question? Oh, sorry, I see that I have to allow you. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now. If you could also drop questions in the chat if that's easier.
Yeah.
And we will be having a question and answer session at the end, so we can also answer any questions then.
Absolutely. All right, should we head to the next slide?
Yes.
So Eurasian Watermilfoil is managed in a variety of different ways, and I'll just go over those briefly and talk about the pros and cons of each of them. So we'll start with hand harvesting, which has been the predominant method for Christina Lake to manage Eurasian Watermilfoil. Oh, it says I can't hear you. Can everybody else hear us? Please just drop a comment. Okay. No problem hearing you. Interesting.
Okay. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that most people can hear us. I'll respond to Colin.
I'll continue on here since most of the participants can hear us. So hand harvesting has been the predominant method that Christina Lake has used. And that's simply with divers going out and essentially weeding the lake. And it's selective because the divers just select the plants that they want. However, it's labor intensive and the plants can fragment, and that's basically just through from human error. And if the plants are accidentally fragmented and then pieces are not all collected, they can drift to another part of the lake and then establish another colony. And then we'll move on to benthic mat. So you can see an example on the right here. And in the middle section, it's just a large film or material that you place over the infestation. So it essentially blocks the light and stops photosynthesis. It can be quite effective at reducing the growth of Eurasian watermilfoil. However, it's very localized to just under the mat. And then we'll move on to machine harvesting. So it's on the bottom. You can see an example on the bottom right, and that's an aquatic harvester that goes along the lake and cuts up the material, the plants with blades. And then the material is funneled into a net and then up and out of the water using a conveyor belt. So this method can be quite effective and it can target large areas of the lake. However, it's not selective, so anything in its way will be cut and removed. And then this method also has some fragmentation. So if the pieces, not all the pieces necessarily get into the net and out and onto the boat. So that can be an issue. And then it can also disrupt the lake ecosystem just because it's disrupting the lake bottom quite a bit. Next, we'll move on to the diver-assisted suction harvesting. And this is when divers go out with essentially a hose and a large vacuum, and they'll go over the plants that they want and suck them up. It can be effective, however, it requires lots of time, and it can also have the same fragmentation issues, and it can be quite disruptive to the ecosystem. And that's because basically anything that gets trapped in the suction will be, such as benthics or other plants, can be sucked up. And it can also release nutrients into the water column, and that's because the sediment gets sucked up into the vacuum as well and disturbed, and the nutrients that are attached to that sediment are then released into the water column. Then we have biocontrol. So you can see a picture on the right of this little bug, and it's called a weevil. And weevils can be quite selective to Eurasian watermilfoil, and they are native to many North American lakes. However, their populations are quite low, and with large infestations, they may not be able to effectively manage the infestation. So how this method works often is weevils will be propagated outside of the lake and then reintroduced in larger numbers. And it doesn't kill the plant. Normally, it just harms the plant and weakens it. And then the last method we'll talk about is your chemical control, which is your herbicides. It can be quite selective and target the whole plant, including the roots, shoots, and leaves. So it would kill off the whole plant. However, not all herbicides can kill the whole plant, and they might just kill the leaves. They also work by targeting a plant growth mechanism, and sometimes native plants will have that same plant growth mechanism. So native plants can be harmed with the use of aquatic herbicides, including selective herbicides. So how has Christina Lake controlled Eurasian watermilfoil in the past? So predominantly through hand pulling, and divers have been on the lake since 1987. And then RDKB has also trialed benthic mats and has seen some positive results, but again, that's very localized and selective to just the area that they've put the mat. And then RDKB has also looked at the feasibility of using weevils to control Eurasian watermilfoil, but has deemed it unfeasible at this point. So trends over time. Have the management methods been effective? So since 2015 to 2024, you can see that the trends have just increased. So from 2015, there was about 400,000 plants. In 2024, we see over 800,000 plants. So effectively, the infestation has doubled. And that's why RDKB is looking at other methods that could potentially be used to control Eurasian watermilfoil. It is important to note that without the divers, likely the infestation would have been much worse. So where's the project now and what are the next steps? So we have researched ProcellaCor FX. We are now engaging the community, and based on the research and community feedback, RDKB will potentially adapt the Christina Lake Eurasian Watermilfoil Control Program. I'm now going to pass the next part of the presentation on to Eleanor, and she's going to discuss what is ProcellaCor FX.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, awesome. I see some yeses in the comments. Sweet. Okay, so as Nadine mentioned, I'm going to be talking about ProcellaCor FX, which is an aquatic herbicide that is used to selectively target invasive plants. And it does this using an active ingredient called fluoroperoxyphene benzyl, which is a new synthetic ingredient that was first approved for use in the United States in 2018 and in Canada in 2023. Currently, there are only 2 approved aquatic herbicides in Canada, ProcellaCor FX, and then one known as Diquat or Reward. I'll get into the approval process a bit more later on in the presentation, but it is a challenging process to get approval, so it's important to note that ProcellaCor has been approved. So how does it work? So as I mentioned, it's a synthetic compound and it mimics a plant growth hormone called an auxin. And so essentially when it's released into the water, it stimulates rapid and unregulated growth in the Eurasian watermilfoil. And essentially the plant can't sustain this growth. And so it kind of like self-destructs. It's a systemic herbicide, so that means once it's been released into the water column, it's uptaken by the leaves, it goes into the shoots and then down into the roots and impacts the entire plant. Usually after exposure, the plant dies within 2 to 4 weeks. And it's important to note that this hormone pathway that it's targeting is specific to plants, and humans and other mammals don't have it. It's selective in that it only targets dicot plants. So when you're looking at the whole plant kingdom, there's like 2 large groups. There's dicots and monocots, and many native species are monocots. So having this herbicide that's able to mainly target dicot plants allows it to be more selective towards invasive species. However, not all native plants are monocots, and there are some native dicot plants found in Christina Lake. I've included a list over on the right side of the screen of some native dicot plants that may be impacted. But milfoils are really susceptible to this auxin control mechanism, and so it allows for the ProcellaCor FX to be applied at really low application rates. So what does this application process look like? As I mentioned, it uses a very low rate, between like 1 to 7 parts per billion. Just for some context, this would be approximately 1 ounce of ProcellaCor in a typical size swimming pool. And this dosage is around 100 to up to 1,000 times lower than other aquatic herbicides. It's always applied by a licensed applicator. So were application pursued, an applicator would be contracted, and then they would come up with a targeted treatment plan. This would identify specific spots to treat the milfoil and would take into account things such as like the milfoil density, water flow in the area, and any native plants that would be nearby. And then the application rate for each spot can be tailored to account to these things and maximize the chance of controlling the Eurasian Watermilfoil and minimize the chances of it impacting any nearby species. Application is most effective when it's applied in the spring and summer when the plants are actively growing, but it can be done later on in the year, like in fall, and across a range of plant growth stages and other environmental conditions. So these are some side by side. So on the left side is Eurasian milfoil 7 days after treatment. You can see that the plant has not yet really senesced or died. But on the right-hand side, 14 days after treatment, you can see that ProcellaCor has effectively killed this plant, and it would no longer be standing in the water column. This image here is from a study where they tested, it was like a tank study where they have, so on the left is an untreated tank, and on the right is a tank that has been treated by ProcellaCor, and the picture is taken 4 weeks after a 6-hour exposure. So on the left tank, on the upper left part, there's Eurasian Watermilfoil, which is indicated by EWM. And then on the top center part, there's hybrid milfoil, which is when Eurasian milfoil hybridizes with northern milfoil. So in the untreated tank, you can see that it is growing and standing tall in the water column. However, in the treated tank, 4 weeks after, you can see that it has senesced and died and is no longer standing. However, the native plants are still growing and appear healthy. One thing that is important to note is that the native plants included in this tank are all monocots, which are less susceptible to ProcellaCor, as well as this study was conducted in the northeastern part of the United States. And so the native plants here are not really found in Christina Lake. However, American pondweed and Illinois pondweed are in the same family as pondweeds that are found in Christina Lake. So does ProcellaCor pose a human health risk? So it's not in the water column for very long. After application, it has a half-life of 1 to 6 days with an average of about 2.6 days. It degrades really rapidly when it's exposed to the sun, and studies have found it to be virtually undetectable in the water column after 48 hours. Health Canada has determined that its presence in food and drinking water does not pose a health risk. And then down in the States, the Vermont Department of Health established a drinking water standard, which is a maximum of 3 milligrams per kilogram per day. Just for comparison, this concentration is about 400 times higher than average concentrations used to treat Eurasian Watermilfoil. Additionally, in a 2-year longitudinal study, rats were given doses of ProcellaCor FX every day to see how it would impact them. They were observed and no harmful impacts were seen. And to reach equivalent dosage levels, an adult human would need to drink over 70,000 liters of water treated with ProcellaCor FX every day. So will it negatively impact the lake's native flora and fauna? So it has been designed to be selective, as I've talked on before. So it is likely that most native aquatic plants would be unharmed. However, there is possible damage to native dicot plants. Research has not identified any toxicological impacts on fish or aquatic invertebrates. And research has also concluded that it does not harm reptiles, amphibians, or fish. It has also not been found to bioaccumulate up through the food chain. Were ProcellaCor FX to be used, there would be no drinking water restrictions following application, no swimming restrictions, no fishing restrictions, and no restriction on turf irrigation. There would be restrictions, however, on irrigation of greenhouse vegetables and fruit, hydroponic irrigation, unless the water used has been filtered through an activated charcoal or similar filtration system. Restrictions on the irrigations of gardens, landscape vegetation, or other non-food irrigation for 5 days. And then the irrigation of commercial field crops until concentrations have been tested and analytically found to be below 2 parts per billion. And these restrictions are not because there's any human health impacts expected with, say, like eating greenhouse vegetables that have been treated with or watered with water that has ProcellaCor in it. It's rather because this is an herbicide that targets dicot plants, which a lot of your vegetable and landscape plants are. So it's likely that if your garden was watered, like immediately following application, your greenhouse plants would die. So previous uses of ProcellaCor. So as I mentioned before, it's still a pretty new substance. So it was approved for use in Canada in 2023. And since then, it's been used in 5 Canadian lakes. For a lot of these, there's not much publicly available data, but except for Farland Lake, which is kind of like the case study. It was the first Canadian lake to use ProcellaCor FX, and it was first applied in September of 2023. A month later, they returned to all the spots where they applied it, and they did follow-up studies to see kind of what was happening. And when they went back, they found that the watermilfoil was dying or dead while native plants were still living. The next summer, they conducted surveys in the same areas, and they did not find any watermilfoil. Native vegetation was found at 13 out of the 15 sites. So this was it was a success for their lake, and they are going to continue to use it as part of a more integrated management strategy. So it's likely that they will continue to use ProcellaCor to manage large kind of like breakthrough infestations of Eurasian Watermilfoil, but the smaller ones, they will continue to use divers or benthic mats or other sort of more small scale management strategies. It was approved for use in the USA by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2018, and since then has been used in over 200 lakes in the USA. All of these applications have been successful, and the lakes have had dramatic reductions in watermilfoil with minimal impact on native species. However, there's no long-term data on what this looks like, as it just like these studies just started in 2018. So the peer-reviewed research around ProcellaCor FX shows that it is effective in treating Eurasian watermilfoil and has minimal impacts on native species. It's also been found that areas that have been treated by ProcellaCor FX have increased species richness following treatment. So basically there are more species, more native species in the area. It's likely that this is because these plants have now been released from competition with the Eurasian watermilfoil and so are able to grow again. And interestingly, herbicide formulations with ProcellaCor's active ingredient have not been found to be toxic to juvenile freshwater mussels. Juvenile freshwater mussels are often seen to be very sensitive and are used as kind of indicators of water quality because of this sensitivity. This study was looking to find the lethal concentration 50 rate, which is essentially when 50% of the organisms die due to exposure, but it was not able to establish this rate due to the lack of mortality at their highest tested concentration. So a lot of the research looks really promising, and it's also very important to acknowledge that, again, there's no long-term data, nothing beyond like 5 years. And a lot of these studies, or the majority of these studies, have been conducted in labs or mesocosms, so like the big tanks I showed earlier, and very few have actually been done in lakes or water bodies. As I mentioned before, I'm going to talk a bit about what the herbicide approval process looks like. So basically, to get approved, you have to go through the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, which is part of Health Canada. And to do this, the applicant prepares a submission that documents potential risks to human and animal health, the way the product degrades in the environment, and the residues that could be left on foods. So the applicant compiles a bunch of scientific studies. In this case, I believe it was over 100, and submits this to the PMRA. And then the PMRA receives this application and assesses it, specifically looking at where, how, and by whom the pest control product will be used, what its toxicity level is, any potential health hazards to users or bystanders, how it will affect drinking water and food, and then how it will impact the environment. And then only once the whole application package has been assessed, and it's only registered if the Pest Management Regulatory Agency decides that sufficient data has been provided to assess the safety and value of the product, a scientific review of health and environmental risks associated with its proposed use deems it acceptable, and a value assessment determines that the product does what it claims to do and sets the lowest effective application rate. I think it's also important to note that once pesticides and herbicides are registered, they are continually reevaluated. So every 15 years, they get reevaluated to make sure that as more studies and more scientific knowledge emerges, that they continue to meet current health and environmental standards. One thing that I want to highlight is that there is a current debate going on about whether fluoroperoxyfen benzyl, which is the active ingredient in ProcellaCor, should be classified as a forever chemical, or which is also known as a PFAS. So currently, the United States Environmental Protection Agency does not classify it as a forever chemical, but recently the Minnesota Department of Agriculture published a report that does include it as a forever chemical. And the difference in like classification is basically what definition you're using to say like this is a PFAS. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture defines any active ingredient that contains at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom as a PFAS, or forever chemical. This just means that in the chemical structure, if you have a carbon and where it would be bonded to a hydrogen atom, it is instead bonded to a fluorine atom, then it is fully fluorinated. This is the broadest definition in regulatory use. It's broader than the Environmental Protection Agency, the European Chemicals Agency, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And using this definition, 95 active ingredients are considered PFAS, versus under the Environmental Protection Agency, it's only 6. So basically the other regulatory bodies that have more narrow definitions have more restrictions on like how the chemical can be structured in order to be considered a PFAS. So I just think that's something that is important to note moving forward. So that kind of concludes the information portion of this presentation. So basically the next steps are, we want to hear your feedback. So we'll document the feedback that we get, including survey responses, as well as concerns or questions raised in this information session. And then we're going to compile all that feedback into a report to the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary. I really want to emphasize that your feedback matters, and like, please tell us what you're thinking about this and how you feel. If you have not already, please fill out the survey to share your opinion. This survey can be found on the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary Join the Conversation page, or the next slide will have a QR code that you can scan. This survey will be open until October 1st. And I also want to take a moment to just say thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your evening to attend this session. We really appreciate it. So with that, any questions?
There are a bunch of questions in the chat. Oh, go ahead. Okay, I can start going through the questions that are in the chat.
Okay, so what are the studies in drinking water? So there have been a lot of different studies that have looked at how its toxicity for mammals and humans, and basically have assessed that it just has such a low toxicity that it's safe to drink. Farland Lake is in Ontario. Has it ever been used in the lake where the vast majority use the water for drinking and cooking? Not to my knowledge. I'm not entirely sure about this. However, I will say that as I mentioned, in the permitting process, Health Canada has looked at lots of scientific, like peer-reviewed independent scientific studies and determined that it is safe to drink. Additionally, it can be removed. It can be removed using activated charcoal filtration or like a carbon filter like a Brita. Procella website has different info on safety for drinking water, does not recommend, but okay for occasional ingestion, versus this presentation stating it's okay for consumption. This is just based off of what we've read from scientific information. It has been approved to be safe, but I can understand that it would not be recommended as it is still an herbicide. With no long-term studies, how can you really say our drinking water is really safe? Previous chemicals have been approved for other applications and then later determined to have caused health issues. I don't think we want to be guinea pigs. This is a really super fair concern. I would agree that like without long-term studies, it is hard to know. All I can say is just that what the current scientific evidence is showing is that it is, they say it is safe now, but I hear you in that it is, without the lack of long-term data, it is, it's scary.
And Terry has a question there with a raised hand.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
That's a long time, 10 years, and finally we're going to get something done to the lake. The lake is, Christina Lake is one of the top lakes in BC. And I think doing this is going to help out. Now, how many times do they have to do that after it kills the milfoil? Do we have to do it in a year's time again, or is it all done?
It is likely that there would be reapplications. Generally, it's like every 3 to 5 years or so, but it depends a lot on what sort of strategy is used for the application. If a more sort of like integrated management strategy is used, it's likely that like divers and benthic mats would still be used to control smaller areas of milfoil, and then ProcellaCor would only be used in the case of a large scale, or like after the first application, ProcellaCor would only be reapplied in the case of a large scale milfoil breakout that can't be controlled by hand pulling. So yeah, so that was a long answer. The shorter answer is like probably around every 3 to 5 years.
Okay, who takes up the cost in doing this?
We haven't really looked at costs at all because this is still very much in the consultation process. And so the RDKB is just looking to see if there is interest at all in doing this. And then if there is, then they'll begin to look at the financial side.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. What is Christina Lake Stewardship Society opinion of this? I'm not totally sure, but we would love to hear it. Is all milfoil bad or just Eurasian? No, not all milfoil is bad. There is a milfoil that's native to North America called northern milfoil. How did you do the milfoil count shown earlier? Those figures were taken from one of the reports from the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary, and that is available online, and I believe would have the methods of how the count was done outlined there. The lake is the only source of water for most waterfront folks. Yeah, I totally understand that. And yeah, again, I just want to emphasize that I hear your concerns, and it's absolutely understandable. Where will it be applied? Spot treatment. It is likely that it will be a spot treatment. So basically, if application were pursued, areas of really dense milfoil outbreaks would be identified, and then those spots would be selectively treated. How would application communication be handled, and how can the waterfront community manage without irrigation or water during those times? So by application communication, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but if application move forward, the next step is applying for a pesticide use permit. And so this is a process that entails a lot more engagement. So it's more formal. The BC government gets involved, and there's additional community engagement as well as engagement with First Nations in the area. And then an application plan is created in conjunction with an applicator and the BC government. And then if that is approved, then that is submitted to the government to apply for the pesticide use permit. In this process, also, like, communication with communities around the lake is outlined, of like how much of notice is required to be given, and kind of standards that you can expect to be notified for if ProcellaCor were to be applied. Hopefully that answers what your question. How can the waterfront community manage without irrigation or water during those times? So you would still have water, there's no restrictions, and ProcellaCor can be used with activated charcoal filtration, removing ProcellaCor from the water. Is the biggest milfoil outbreak at the south side of the lake? I am actually not super familiar with Christina Lake, so I am not entirely sure, but I do know that there is a large outbreak on the south side. How often is it predicted that another application would have to be done? Kind of touched on this already. Again, a lot of it would depend on the strategy that the RDKB implemented, but it's likely that it would be around every 3 to 5 years or so. Are there any animal studies longer than 2 years? Off the top of my head, I'm not totally confident about this. I'm not sure. But I would definitely encourage, if anyone wants to read peer-reviewed research using Google Scholar, I find to be a really accessible and helpful search engine. So you could type in something like ProcellaCor animal studies and see what comes up. I'm also, if you put that in the survey, I can also look into this and get that information to you. How would the community know when it's done? There would be notices would go out, and this is something that the BC government would be involved in, and it would be a pretty standardized process of everyone will be notified with a set amount of time within a certain distance of the application. Will the water find itself in the USA, and is that okay with the First Nations? It is really highly unlikely that ProcellaCor will move beyond Christina Lake. As I mentioned before, it has a really short half-life, so it's in the water and then it gets rapidly taken in by the plants. And then what is not taken in by the plants degrades with exposure to sunlight. So usually within 1 to 6 days is the half-life, as I mentioned before, an average of 2.5 days. So it's really only in the water for a short period of time, and I would be very surprised if it left Christina Lake. So further consultation will be happening with First Nations, and I cannot speak on behalf of anyone, so I'm not going to say whether it's okay or not. So all waterfront owners would have to implement charcoal filtration. No, you would not. That's just an option. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Annie. On behalf of Christina Lake Stewardship Society, a public statement can't be done on this as all directors don't agree, but in majority, we are not in support, especially with the lack of long-term studies. Awesome. Thank you for that feedback. Where's the milfoil the densest in the lake? Is there a map of where it occurs in Christina Lake? Yes, so there are publicly available reports on the milfoil in Christina Lake. I do not have any of them currently available, but they are online. BC Parks is our neighbor. Are they aware of this? And if so, what is their opinion? I am not sure about this, but that is something that if the process were to move forward, we could look into more. South end is at the outflow down the river. 2 to 6 days, it can travel a long ways. Park is at the south end. Okay, I see. So you're talking about the milfoil leaving the lake. Yeah, so that, I mean, that is something that would definitely be taken into account for application plans, looking at water flow and definitely trying to minimize any chance of it leaving the lake. Sorry, it's just another question. So yeah, so that's something that if treatment were pursued would definitely be taken into account in the application plans. Who has to apply to this? Who has to apply for this to be done? The Regional District of Kootenay Boundary has to apply for the pesticide use permit. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Did you say that the stewardship committee does not agree because there is no study, or it doesn't make sense to me? I mean, the stewardship committee has to go through the people at Christina Lake on what to do, not just the stewardship committee says they're not going to go ahead or they're thinking of it until there's more plans. I just doesn't make any sense to me that that's what happens. I thought the people at Christina Lake should have a say on what is going to be done or what should be done. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that opinion. I think that this was, okay, I think that maybe they were the response was just saying they wouldn't make a public statement on whether or not they endorsed it. But I think that your opinion is still very important, and that's what we're trying to collect right now is how residents of Christina Lake feel about this.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development, since this is in the water, do you have to check in with them? Likely, so this would be something that would be part of the pesticide use application permit if so. Basically, when you apply for it, you go through the BC government, and like that is when all the regulatory steps happen. Can we get a copy of this presentation? Yes, I believe that one is available on the Join the Conversation page, and if not, it can be uploaded after this engagement session. Yeah, thank you, Tara, for all the questions. I appreciate it. Okay, here's as a group, the Christina Lake Stewardship Society can't take a stand on this as we are not all in agreement. Some directors support it, some don't, but ultimately, like it was pointed out, this is not a Christina Lake Stewardship Society decision, it's everybody's decision. Just post comments on Join the Conversation. It isn't just lakefront owners getting their drinking water from the lake. Christina Lake Waterworks gets their drinking water from the lake. Are there any more questions or anything else anyone wants to add? Has increased pulling of it been reviewed as an option? So the pulling is continuing and will probably continue regardless of whether ProcellaCor, or will definitely continue regardless of whether ProcellaCor is used. However, it's really expensive and kind of in time. It's expensive in both money and time, because it takes a lot of effort for individual divers to go down and pull individual plants. And so with the scale of this infestation, it's just hard to control it with only divers. And so that's why alternative methods are being looked at. I just want to say thank you to the kind comments. I appreciate them. Okay, will the treatment affect the white and pink water lilies that are spreading so quickly at the south end of the lake? It's not. So there is a chance that ProcellaCor is able to control water lilies, but that's something that's still actively being investigated. So I can't say for sure. Also invasive, yeah. Yeah, so it's only been approved to control milfoil. But yeah, they're currently looking into whether water lilies could also be managed using it. Okay, if anyone wants to speak and can't unmute, would you mind raising your hand? And I believe that I can allow you to unmute. Or I'm sorry, I'm not totally sure how to give that power back to the group. Or maybe just say something in the comments and then I can find you and unmute you. Okay.
Annie.
Okay, Annie, you should be able to unmute now. Okay, it should. Okay, you should be able to mute and unmute yourself. Really quick, I'm just seeing another question in the comments saying, understanding that this will be targeted use, any idea of projected cost? So kind of as I said before, we're not in the phase of looking at costs right now. If there is enough community support behind this idea to move it forward and to look at applying for the pesticide use permit, at that point, we'll start looking into projected costs. Question on targeted use, shorter half-life, but there still must be a spread. How far does it disperse? Christina is a fast flow lake. Yeah, so it will be dispersed following like the hydrodynamic patterns within the lake. And so the fact that Christina does have pretty fast flow is something that definitely will be looked at and accounted for in the application plans. Yeah, so basically, like it is likely that there will be some spread, but the application plans can be targeted to areas where there is slower water flow, and ideally areas of really thick milfoil. So even if it does spread, it will still be taken up by those plants. At this point, based off public surveys and other means, would you say the majority of the community is for or against it? We're still just kind of compiling the information right now. We don't have a clear like binary of whether people are for or against it, but we will be synthesizing everything into a report following once the survey is closed at the October 1st. Can't guarantee it won't move. Yeah, it absolutely will be, like, once it's put into the water, yeah, the currents in Christina Lake will move it. But as I said before, it does just have a short half-life, and so it won't move, or sorry, it will move, but hopefully most of it will be taken up by the plants and the rest will rapidly degrade with exposure to sunlight. Annie says, I just wanted to share that ultimately Christina Lake Stewardship Society is about educating with such programs. The decision on this isn't made. Please stress the importance to visit, join the conversation, to express opinions as a chance for everyone to be heard. Yes, thank you so much for that comment, Annie. Yeah, the decision on this very much isn't made at all. It's your opinion and feedback is going to be the driving force behind this decision. And so yeah, please go to join the conversation, to express your opinions, to leave comments, and to fill out the survey if you haven't already. Do you know when the decision will be made? I don't know. Sometime after October 1st when the survey is closed, and then we will be compiling the report through November, so it's likely sometime after that. Too many questions with no answer. Does feel uncertain that Christina Lake should ever go forward. Yeah, I hear that, and I think that that's something that's definitely important to take into account, because this is such a new herbicide where there's not a ton of definitive research about it. So it is, yeah, it is. I hear that. Need more time to study. Not used in drinking water lake. New approval. Long-term animal studies needed. Yeah, so there, and again, there is quite a lot of scientific research out there. Not, as I've mentioned, it's not long-term, but there is quite a wealth of research if you are interested in looking into this more. Are benthic mats still being used? Yes, so this is the second year that the pilot program has been used to put benthic mats in the lake, and they are, as Nadine mentioned, they are effective at controlling milfoil, but only over the areas that they cover. So it's not a very scalable way to manage milfoil in the lake. Not an experiment I want to test on my children. Heard. So benthic mats are still new to the lake. Yes, I believe this is the second year that they've been doing the pilot program. Does milfoil grow at a certain depth? Yes, it's usually between like 3 to 5 meters. It has been found of depths of up to 10 meters, but it needs light penetration through the water column. So basically, it's any area where where light is coming through, which is also known as the littoral zone in the lake, is where milfoil can grow. Benthic mats were used years ago. Okay, interesting. There's also currently a pilot program that's in its second year running right now. Does anyone have more questions or comments? We've got about a little over 5 minutes left. Sounds like it needs to be tackled from many angles. Yes, I would totally agree. I think that the best way to handle any sort of invasive plant is from like a multifaceted approach. And so yeah, using like multiple strategies like divers and benthic mats, and if the community is for it, at times herbicides can be a way to move forward and minimize the impact of invasive plants in the region. Does anyone else have more questions? Thank you for your info. If there's any way you could email this out to attendees, that would be great. I believe that when you registered, your email was collected, so I'll reach out to Stephen with the regional district and see if we can arrange that. It's already showing at the north end. I'm assuming that's milfoil growth at the north end. North end is shallow, that's why. So yeah, so milfoil can rapidly outcompete native plants, and once it gets established somewhere, it's able to grow in these really dense mats and basically displace all the native plants. Any more questions? I just want to take this moment to say again, thank you all so much for being here and for asking questions and listening to the presentation. I really appreciate it. I know the regional district really appreciates it. And yeah, we really want to hear your feedback, and your community input is super important for this project. So yeah, I really appreciate your time. What will happen if the milfoil gets worse? Well, basically, if like nothing is done for the milfoil, it'll probably just continue to grow until it is. So basically with invasive plants, they're able to rapidly grow and outcompete native plants, and they can just kind of grow in almost all areas. And so it'll colonize it's likely that it would colonize wherever it's able to grow and then just kind of establish itself at this really high density. This would have a lot of really negative impacts for native plants growing in the area, as well as fish that rely on native plants for food or habitat. It basically just kind of creates a monoculture in the lake, which has a bunch of kind of scaling impacts on the overall lake health. So basically, if it just continues to grow, it is bad for the lake. Is a very simple answer. What are the risks of an algae bloom after a ProcellaCor treatment? That's a good question that I am not totally sure of. I think that my kind of gut response is that I don't believe that it would trigger an algae bloom. However, as Nadine mentioned, like it can cause, as the plant dies, it can cause deoxygenization as the bacteria decompose the milfoil. So that's different from an algae bloom, but could be an impact of the ProcellaCor treatment. But yeah, I believe the risks of an algae bloom would be quite low. Okay, we've got just one more minute. So if there are any more last minute questions, throw them in the chat and I'll answer them.
Thank you all for coming out, and thanks, Eleanor, for tackling all those questions.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone. And yeah, please fill out the survey. All right, looks like that's time. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, so much. Really appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.